The massive crystal chamber floated silently in the empty space between stars. Inside this gigantic structure, creatures from 847 different worlds sat in perfect rows. Some looked like walking trees, others glowed like living fire, and many had shapes that no human eye had ever seen before. But despite how different they all appeared, they moved together like parts of a single machine. Elder Korvash stood at the center of the chamber. His body was made of what looked like living crystal, and when he spoke, his voice rang out like music. For 3,000 years, he had watched over these meetings, and in all that time, not one creature had ever disagreed with another. Not once. Today we discuss the expansion of Sector 12 Beta, Korvash announced. His words were instantly translated into 847 different languages. Some delegates heard clicks and whistles. Others felt vibrations through their skin, and a few received the message as colors that danced in their minds. The plan was simple and clean. 3 worlds in Sector 12. Beta contained valuable metals needed for starship construction. The problem was that primitive creatures lived on these worlds. They had not yet learned to travel between stars, so the Council classified them as developing species. The solution was equally simple: move these creatures to new homes and begin mining operations. A delegate from the Aquatic Federation raised one of her 6 arms. Her body was transparent blue like living water. "The mathematical projections show optimal efficiency," she said in a voice that sounded like waves on a beach. "The relocation will be completed in 2 standard cycles with minimal disruption." Another delegate nodded his agreement. This one looked like a giant insect made of gold metal. "The machine consciousness has analyzed all variables. This plan produces the best outcome for all involved parties." One by one, each delegate spoke their approval. The tree people swayed their branches in agreement. The fire beings flickered brighter to show support. The stonewalkers stamped their heavy feet in rhythm. Everything moved according to ancient patterns that had not changed in thousands of years. The youngest delegates watched with respect and wonder. They had grown up hearing stories about the old days, when different species used to fight and argue with each other. Those were called the times of chaos, and everyone agreed that those days were terrible. Back then, meetings like this would sometimes last for months as delegates shouted and disagreed about everything. But the great leaders of the past had solved that problem. They created the system of perfect unity. The telepathic species could sense when someone was about to disagree and would gently guide their thoughts toward harmony. The ancient builders had used mathematics to prove that unity always produced better results than conflict. Most importantly, they had established the sacred rule: every vote must be unanimous. "The Council will now vote on Proposal 7 Alpha 12 Beta," Elder Korvash announced. "All those in favor?" The response came like a great wave rolling across the chamber. 847 voices spoke as one. Approved. Elder Korvash prepared to close the session as he had done thousands of times before. But then something impossible happened. A shimmer appeared in the air above the center of the chamber. The shimmer grew larger and brighter until it became a swirling portal of light. Through this portal stepped a creature none of them had seen before. It walked on 2 legs like some of the other species, but its skin was a strange brown color and it had fur only on the top of its head. The creature wore simple blue clothing and carried a small device in its hand. "I am Ambassador Park Jimin," the creature said in a clear, calm voice. "I represent the species called humans from the planet Earth in the Sol system." A murmur of recognition rippled through the chamber. The human application for council membership had been approved just days ago. Like all applications, it had passed with a unanimous vote after the standard checks confirmed that humans posed no threat to galactic peace. Ambassador Jimin walked to an empty seat that had been prepared for him. He was now the 848th member of the Galactic Council. His people had just achieved something that billions of other species only dreamed of: a voice in galactic government. Elder Korvash smiled, or at least made the expression that his crystal face used for smiling. "Welcome, Ambassador Jimin. You arrived just as we are voting on an important matter. I will repeat the proposal for your benefit." Korvash quickly explained the Sector 12 Beta expansion plan. 3 primitive worlds would be emptied of their native creatures, so that valuable metals could be extracted from the planets. The creatures would be relocated to suitable new homes. The mathematical projections showed this was the most efficient solution for everyone involved. The vote was unanimous in favor, Corvash continued. As the newest member, we invite you to add your voice to the consensus. All in favor of Proposal 7 Alpha 12 Beta. Ambassador Jimin stood up slowly. His small form seemed tiny compared to the massive beings around him. The chamber fell silent as 847 species waited to hear the word that would make their decision complete. Park Jimin looked around the vast chamber, meeting the eyes or sensory organs of creatures from across the galaxy. Then, he spoke 2 words that would change everything. I vote no. The words I vote no hung in the air like a strange sound that nobody could understand. For several long seconds, the entire chamber remained perfectly still. 847 beings sat frozen in their seats, their minds trying to process something that their brains told them was impossible. Ambassador Park Jimin stood calmly in his spot, his hands folded behind his back. He looked around the chamber with curious eyes, watching as the other delegates slowly began to react to what he had said. Some of them were blinking rapidly. Others were making small clicking sounds. A few of the fire beings had started to flicker, in patterns that seemed confused and uncertain. Elder Corvash was the first to speak, but his usual musical voice now sounded shaky and uncertain. I apologize, Ambassador Jimin. Perhaps there was an error in the translation systems. Could you please repeat your response to the vote? There was no error, Jimin replied in the same calm tone. I said I vote no. I do not support this proposal. The telepathic collective, a group of pale beings with large heads, suddenly began making distressed humming sounds. Their mental networks, which had worked perfectly for thousands of years, were crashing under the weight of this new information. They had built their entire system around sensing agreement, not disagreement. Their minds simply did not know how to process a no vote. The ancient builders, who looked like living mathematical equations made of light, began flashing in rapid sequences. Their probability calculations were producing error messages for the first time in their existence. According to their math, what had just happened had a 0% chance of occurring. A delegate from the Stonewalker civilization slowly stood up. Her body was made of gray rock, and when she moved, small pebbles fell from her joints. What does no mean? She asked in a voice like grinding stone. I do not understand this word in this context. It means I disagree with the proposal, Jimin explained patiently. I think it is wrong and I will not support it. The chamber erupted into chaos, but not the violent kind of chaos that the history books described from the old days. This was something much stranger and more unsettling. Delegates were not shouting or fighting. Instead, they were sitting in confused silence, whispering to each other in voices filled with bewilderment. Many of the younger delegates had never heard the word disagree used in a council session. Their languages had words for disagreement, but those words were only used to describe historical events or theoretical concepts. Some species had actually removed such words from their everyday vocabulary because they were considered harmful to social harmony. Elder Corvash tried to restore order by tapping his crystal staff against the floor. The sound rang out like a bell, but instead of bringing silence, it seemed to make the confusion worse. Ambassador Jimin, he said carefully, perhaps you do not fully understand our procedures. The Council operates on the principle of perfect unity. All decisions must be unanimous. This means everyone must agree. I understand your procedures perfectly, Jimin replied, but I do not agree with this decision, so I cannot vote for it. But you must agree, said a delegate from the machine consciousness. His voice sounded like a computer trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Our analysis shows that this proposal produces the best possible outcome for all parties involved. The mathematics are perfect. Jimin shook his head. Your mathematics may be perfect, but your morals are not. You are planning to destroy 3 entire civilizations so you can dig metals out of their planets. On my world, we have a word for this kind of action. What word? Asked Elder Corvash, though his voice suggested he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Genocide, Jimin said simply. The word hit the chamber, like a physical blow. Translation: systems across the chamber began making warning sounds as they tried to process a concept that had been banned from galactic discourse for millennia. Several species did not have equivalent words in their languages because such ideas had been declared obsolete and dangerous. A delegate from the Crystal Dominion, whose body looked like a walking diamond, began to flicker with red light. That word is forbidden. Such concepts threaten the stability of our society. Why is it forbidden? Jimin asked. Because it describes exactly what you are planning to do. For the first time in 3,000 years, delegates began talking to each other instead of simply agreeing with each other. The Aquatic Federation started whispering among themselves about old territorial disputes with the Crystal Dominion that had never been properly resolved. The tree people began rustling their leaves in agitated patterns as they discussed issues that had been bothering them for centuries, but that they had never been allowed to voice. The Hive Collective, a group of insect-like beings who usually moved in perfect synchronization, began breaking formation as individual members started expressing different opinions. Some of them wondered aloud whether their voluntary assimilation policies were truly voluntary, or whether they had been using subtle pressure to force agreement. Elder Korvash watched this unprecedented scene with growing alarm. The perfect order that had defined galactic civilization for millennia was beginning to crack, and it was all because one small human had said two simple words: I vote no. The council will take a brief recess, Korvash announced, his voice now showing clear signs of panic. We must consult the historical archives to determine how to proceed. But as delegates began filing out of the chamber, still talking to each other in confused and excited voices, everyone knew that something fundamental had changed. The age of perfect unity was ending, and nobody knew what would come next. The recess was supposed to last 1 hour. Instead, it stretched into 3 days as the Galactic Council faced something they had not experienced in 3,000 years. Complete confusion about what to do next. Ambassador Park Jimin sat in the human delegation's quarters, a small room with simple furniture that had been quickly prepared for Earth's representatives. Through the large window, he could see other delegates gathering in groups throughout the station's common areas. This was something that had never happened before. Usually, delegates returned to their private quarters during breaks and waited quietly for the session to resume. Kim Minho, Jimin's assistant, watched the activity outside with fascination. Look at them, he said, pointing to a group of Crystal Dominion delegates who were having what appeared to be a heated discussion with members of the Aquatic Federation. They are actually talking to each other. More than talking, Jimin observed. They are arguing. The word arguing would have been considered dangerous just days ago. Now it was happening everywhere they looked. The tree people were swaying, their branches in agitated patterns while communicating with the stonewalkers. The machine consciousness delegates were gathered around their portable computing devices, running calculations that kept producing different results. Elder Korvash had spent the first day locked in his private chambers, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The telepathic collective had been brought in to examine his thoughts, but their own mental networks were still crashing every time they tried to process the concept of disagreement. On the second day, something even more unprecedented happened. Delegates began visiting each other's quarters to continue discussions that had started in the main chamber. The Aquatic Federation sent representatives to speak privately with the Crystal Dominion about territorial disputes that had been simmering for centuries. We never realized you felt that way about the Nebula Border Agreement, admitted crystalline Delegate Vexandra, her diamond-like body flickering with colors that indicated confusion and concern. We were not allowed to feel that way, replied Aquatic Delegate Morgana, her water-like form rippling with emotions that had been suppressed for generations. The telepathic collective always guided our thoughts toward agreement before we could express our concerns. This revelation sent shockwaves through both delegations. They began to examine other agreements and treaties, wondering how many of them had been accepted not because they were truly fair, but because dissenting thoughts had been gently eliminated before they could be voiced. The machine consciousness. made an even more disturbing discovery. Their ethical programming, which had guided their decisions for millennia, was based entirely on mathematical models that assumed unanimous agreement was always possible and always correct. They had never developed protocols for handling situations where different viewpoints might both be valid. Our logic circuits are experiencing cascading failures, reported Machine Consciousness Delegate Unit 47923. We were programmed to find the single correct answer to every question. We do not know how to process the possibility that multiple correct answers might exist. The tree people discovered that their ancient root networks, which had traditionally shared all thoughts and feelings across their species, had been gradually modified over the centuries to filter out any ideas that might lead to disagreement. Entire categories of thoughts and emotions had been blocked from their collective consciousness. We have been living in an echo chamber, admitted tree person Elder Branch Singer, her leaves rustling with distress. We thought we were sharing all of our thoughts, but we were only sharing the thoughts that the system approved. By the third day, delegates were no longer just talking to members of their own species. Mixed groups were forming throughout the station as beings who had never spoken to each other began sharing perspectives and experiences. Lee So-young, another member of the human delegation, found herself in the middle of one such group. Representatives from 6 different species had gathered in one of the station's recreation areas, all trying to understand what had happened to their perfect society. "Your species has done something terrible to us," said a fire-being delegate, his flames flickering with what might have been anger or confusion. "You have broken our unity." "We did not break anything," So-young replied calmly. "We just showed you that your unity was not real. Real unity means choosing to work together, even when you disagree about things. What you had was forced agreement." "But forced agreement worked," protested a Stonewalker delegate. "We had peace. We had order. We had efficiency." "Did you have happiness?" asked Delegate Choi Yuna, who had joined the group. "Did you have growth? Did you have the chance to become better than you were?" The question hung in the air like Jimin's no vote had hung in the council chamber. None of the delegates could answer immediately, because they had never been asked to think about such things before. The historical archives, which had been sealed for centuries, were finally opened on the third day. What the researchers found there shocked everyone. The times of chaos that they had been taught to fear were not actually chaotic at all. They were times of vibrant debate, creative problem-solving, and genuine democracy. Wars had been rare during those periods. Most conflicts had been resolved through negotiation and compromise. The galaxy had actually been more peaceful during the easy times when disagreement was allowed than during the age of perfect unity. "We have been living a lie," Elder Corvash admitted to his closest advisors. "We thought we were preventing chaos, but we were actually preventing life itself." As the third day came to an end, it became clear that the Galactic Council could never return to the way things had been. The age of perfect unity was over, and nobody knew what would replace it. The only thing they knew for certain was that one human's simple no had changed everything. The fourth day brought something that terrified the Galactic Council more than any war or natural disaster: the complete breakdown of their decision-making system. Elder Corvash stood before an emergency assembly, his crystal form flickering with uncertainty as he addressed delegates who were no longer sitting in their assigned seats. Instead of the perfect rows that had defined the chamber for millennia, delegates had arranged themselves in small circles and clusters. Some were still talking animatedly with species they had never spoken to before. Others sat alone, staring into space as they processed thoughts and feelings that had been buried for generations. "The Council recognizes that we face an unprecedented situation," Corvash began, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "We have discovered that our system of perfect unity may have flaws." A rumble of agreement came from the crowd, but it was not the synchronized response of the past. Different species made different sounds at different times, creating a chaotic symphony that somehow felt more alive than the old mechanical harmony. Ambassador Park Jimin watched from his seat as delegates continued to make discoveries about their own history and psychology. The machine consciousness had been working around the clock to rewrite their ethical programming, but every new version created more questions than answers. We have found 17 different valid solutions to the Sector 12 beta mining proposal, announced Unit 47923, his mechanical voice carrying a tone that might have been confusion or wonder. Our previous programming would have forced us to choose only one, but now we see that multiple approaches could work. The telepathic collective had made an even more shocking discovery. For centuries, they had believed they were simply sensing the thoughts and emotions of other species. But detailed analysis of their own mental processes revealed that they had been subtly influencing those thoughts, pushing them toward agreement without realizing it. We were not just reading minds, admitted telepath Prime Zaralyn, her large head drooping with shame. We were editing them. Every time we sensed disagreement beginning to form, we would send out calming influences that made the disagreement seem less important or less valid. This revelation sent waves of anger and confusion through the chamber. Many delegates realized that their own thoughts and opinions over the centuries had been shaped by external influences they had never detected. The Aquatic Federation delegate Morgana rose from her seat, her water-like form rippling with emotions that had been suppressed for generations. How many of our decisions were truly our own? How many times did we agree to something only because you made disagreement feel uncomfortable? We did not mean to cause harm, Zaralyn protested, but her words fell flat in the face of centuries of unwitting manipulation. Delegate Choi Yuna had been moving between different groups, asking questions that helped species examine their own decision-making processes. She had discovered that almost every species in the Council had developed some form of conformity pressure that prevented dissent. The tree people had root networks that shared thoughts, but those networks had been programmed to reject negative thoughts. The Stonewalkers had cultural traditions that made disagreement with elders literally unthinkable. The fire beings had emotional resonance that made them automatically match the feelings of those around them. You all created your own prisons, Yuna observed during one group discussion. You were so afraid of conflict that you eliminated the ability to have different opinions. But conflict is dangerous, protested a Crystal Dominion delegate. The history books tell us that disagreement leads to war and suffering. Which history? Books? Asked Ambassador Kang Jiwoo, who had been studying the newly opened archives. The ones written during the Perfect Unity period? Because the older records tell a very different story. Jiwoo had spent days reading through documents from before the Great Unification. What she found contradicted everything the modern council believed about their past. The times of chaos had actually been periods of remarkable creativity and growth. Your ancestors did not fight wars over every disagreement, she explained to a mixed group of delegates. They debated, they compromised, they found creative solutions that satisfied multiple viewpoints. The galaxy was actually more peaceful when disagreement was allowed. The ancient builders had been trying to create new mathematical models that could handle multiple valid solutions to the same problem. But their computers kept crashing because their entire logical framework was built on the assumption that every question had only one correct answer. We need to rebuild our thinking from the foundation up, admitted Builder Prime Axiom 7, his light form flickering with patterns that indicated deep confusion. Our mathematics worked perfectly for finding single solutions, but reality appears to be far more complex than we understood. Elder Korvash had been meeting privately with representatives from different species, trying to understand the full scope of what they were facing. What he learned horrified him. The perfect unity system had not just prevented disagreement, it had prevented growth, creativity, and genuine problem-solving. We have been stagnant for 3,000 years, he confided to his closest advisors. We thought we were maintaining peace, but we were actually maintaining death. A living society must be able to change and growth requires the ability to disagree with the current state of things. The most disturbing discovery came from the youngest delegates, those who had been born during the Perfect Unity period. Many of them reported feeling empty and purposeless, as if something essential was missing from their lives. They had been taught that harmony was the highest goal, but they had never experienced the satisfaction of working through disagreement to reach a better solution. We were not really alive. admitted a young tree person named Leaf Whisper. We were just existing, following patterns that someone else had decided were correct. As the fourth day ended, the Galactic Council faced the truth. Their perfect system had been a beautiful lie that had cost them their souls. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Park Jimin first spoke the words "I vote no" in the Galactic Council chamber. The crystal structure that housed the council looked the same from the outside, but everything inside had changed completely. The perfectly arranged rows of seats were gone. In their place, delegates sat in curved sections that allowed them to face each other during discussions. The chamber's walls, once smooth and uniform, now displayed art and symbols from all 848 member worlds. Most importantly, the ancient silence that had defined council sessions for millennia had been replaced by the sound of voices engaged in passionate debate. Elder Corvash, who now insisted on being called simply Delegate Corvash, stood at the center of the chamber. His crystal form no longer flickered with the rigid patterns of authority, but with the warm, shifting colors of someone who was still learning and growing. The council will now vote on the revised Sector 12 beta proposal, he announced. This is our 47th attempt to find a solution that satisfies the concerns raised by our member species. The original proposal to relocate 3 primitive civilizations had been completely abandoned. In its place was a complex agreement that involved the 3 native species as full partners in the mining operation. They would receive education, technology, and a percentage of all profits in exchange for allowing careful extraction of metals from uninhabited areas of their worlds. The process of reaching this new proposal had taken months of debate, compromise, and creative problem-solving. It was messy, complicated, and sometimes frustrating. It was also more alive than anything the Council had experienced in 3,000 years. Representative Choi Yuna from the human delegation had become an unofficial mediator, helping different species understand each other's perspectives. She had spent weeks working with the Aquatic Federation and the Crystal Dominion to resolve their ancient territorial disputes, which had been festering beneath the surface of forced unity for centuries. The Nebula Border Agreement has been revised to include regular reviews and adjustment mechanisms, she reported to the chamber. Both parties now have the right to request changes if their needs change over time. More importantly, they have agreed to actually talk to each other about their concerns instead of just accepting whatever the telepathic collective suggested. The telepathic collective had undergone the most dramatic transformation of any group. Led by telepath Prime Zara Lin, they had completely redesigned their mental networks to encourage diversity of thought rather than suppress it. Instead of pushing for agreement, they now helped species understand each other's different viewpoints. We have learned to listen without judgment, Zara Lin explained to the chamber. Our role is no longer to create harmony by eliminating disagreement, but to create understanding by helping everyone communicate clearly. The machine consciousness had also evolved in unexpected ways. Unit 47923, now calling himself Questioner instead of using his old designation, had developed something his creators never programmed: curiosity about things that could not be calculated. We have been studying human poetry, Questioner announced, his mechanical voice carrying tones that suggested emotion. It makes no logical sense, but it contains truths that our mathematical models cannot capture. We are learning that efficiency is not the only measure of value. The tree people had reconnected their root networks, but with new protocols that celebrated different thoughts and feelings, rather than filtering them out. Elder Branch Singer had been working with younger tree people to recover emotional experiences that had been suppressed for generations. We had forgotten how to feel sadness, anger, and fear, she explained to a mixed group of delegates. We thought these emotions were harmful, but we have learned that they are essential parts of being alive. You cannot truly appreciate joy if you have never experienced sorrow. The Stonewalkers had begun questioning their ancient traditions that made disagreement with elders impossible. Younger Stonewalkers were now encouraged to challenge their elders' decisions, leading to more creative solutions to problems that had remained unsolved for centuries. Ambassador Park Jimin watched these transformations with quiet satisfaction. He had never intended to start a revolution. but he was proud of what the galaxy had become. The council was no longer perfectly efficient, but it was infinitely more creative and alive. The vote on the revised Sector 12 Beta proposal finally came. Unlike the old days when every vote was predetermined, this outcome was genuinely uncertain. Delegates had been debating the details for weeks, and several species remained undecided. All those in favor of the revised proposal? Delegate Korvash asked. The response came in waves as different species voted at different times. Some delegates stood, others changed color, and a few communicated their votes through sounds or movements. When the count was finished, the result was closer than any vote in galactic history. 426 in favor, 422 opposed. The chamber erupted in celebration, but not because of who had won or lost. They were celebrating the fact that they had managed to disagree strongly about something important and still remain united as a governing body. "We have learned something precious," Delegate Korvash announced as the celebration continued. "We have learned that real unity is not the absence of disagreement, but the choice to work together despite our differences." Ambassador Kim Minho, who had replaced Jimin as the head of the human delegation, smiled as he watched species from across the galaxy embrace the messy, complicated, beautiful process of democracy. "Your people gave us a great gift," Delegate Korvash said to Minho after the session ended. "You showed us that saying no sometimes makes yes mean something." The Galactic Council was no longer unified in the sterile sense they had once prized. Instead, they had discovered something far more valuable. Unity that chose itself over and over again through the difficult but rewarding process of working together while remaining different.